People talk about oil like it's the most valuable resource on Earth. And for most of the last century, they were right. Oil built empires, started wars, and turned desert countries into some of the wealthiest places in the world. But there's a resource that's going to matter more in the second half of this century. And right now, 21% of the world's supply of fresh surface water sits in 5 lakes along the US-Canada border. Most people call that region the Rust Belt. They think of abandoned factories and cities the economy left behind. What they're not thinking about is the water. And that's a mistake that's going to look more and more obvious with every passing decade. Right now, Phoenix is rationing water. Las Vegas is watching Lake Mead drain by the foot. You could drive to the reservoir that supplies 25 million people in the American Southwest and see the white bathtub ring on the canyon walls. Hundreds of feet of exposed rock that used to be underwater. Meanwhile, someone in Cleveland fills a glass from the tap without thinking twice. No rationing, no restrictions, no fear. Just water. That gap between the water crisis out west and the abundance of the Great Lakes is what this video is about. Because the gap is getting wider. And it's going to change where Americans can actually live. Let's start with the numbers, because the numbers are the part nobody really grasps. Lake Superior alone, just one of the 5 lakes, holds enough water to flood all of North and South America to a depth of 1 foot. Every field, every road, every city across 2 continents flooded under 12 inches of water. That's a single lake. The 5 lakes together hold roughly 22,500 cubic kilometers of water. That's a number too big to mean much, so here's a comparison that might help. The Mississippi River is the largest river in the United States. It drains 40% of the lower 48. At its normal flow rate, it would take the Mississippi roughly 8 years to fill Lake Superior. 8 years of the country's biggest river, pouring into one basin before it's full. Now take the Colorado River. The Colorado supplies water to 40 million people across 7 states. It is, by every measure, the most politically contested river in America. What the Colorado carries in an entire year, its full annual flow, Lake Michigan holds permanently. All the time, year-round, just sitting there. But here's the strange part. Most of that water is ancient. It didn't fall as rain last winter. The vast majority of what's in the Great Lakes was deposited by glaciers during the last ice age, and it hasn't left. The lakes recharge slowly, so slowly that if you drained them, they wouldn't refill within any human time frame that matters. This water simply exists, in quantities that have no parallel on Earth outside the polar ice caps. It's not renewable in the normal sense. It's more like a one-time inheritance. The obvious answer is that America has water everywhere. Rivers, aquifers, reservoirs, coast to coast. What's the problem? The problem is that the water and the people are in the wrong places, and that gap is growing. The Colorado River Compact was signed in 1922, during one of the wettest decades in recorded history for that region. The states that signed it divided up rights to more water than the river actually produces in a normal year. For most of the 20th century, that didn't matter much. Population in the Southwest was low. The overestimate was just a number in a document. Then Las Vegas happened. Then Phoenix happened. Then Los Angeles kept growing. And now the river produces roughly 14 million acre-feet per year, while the legal rights to that water add up to more than 16 million. The river is overcommitted by design, and there is no easy fix. Lake Mead, the largest reservoir in the United States, the main storage tank for the Colorado River, sat at 27% capacity in 2022. The federal government enforced its first ever water shortage on the Colorado that same year. Cities across the Southwest have spent billions on desalination studies, wastewater recycling, and conservation programs. All of it is necessary. None of it is enough on its own. Go east from the Colorado, and the Ogallala Aquifer sits beneath 8 states, from South Dakota down to Texas. It irrigates roughly 30% of all U.S. groundwater-fed farmland. The problem is that the Ogallala recharges at a rate measured in fractions of an inch per year, and farmers have been pulling from it for decades at rates thousands of times faster. In parts of Kansas and Texas, the aquifer is already effectively gone. In others, it has decades left, but only decades. So far, we've only been talking about where the water isn't. But we haven't yet talked about why the water that sits in the Great Lakes is so much harder to take away than it looks. In 2008, 8 US states and 2 Canadian provinces, Ontario and Quebec, signed the Great Lakes Compact. The compact does one essential thing. It says that no water can be diverted outside the Great Lakes Basin without unanimous consent from all 10 parties. Every state, both provinces, all of them. One no vote kills any proposal. Compare that to the Colorado River Compact, a century-old agreement written in an era before satellites, before modern hydrology, before anyone knew how many people would eventually move to the desert. The Colorado Compact is structurally broken. Water lawyers have been arguing over it for decades, and the states that rely on it can't agree on how to fix it. There is no mechanism for unanimous enforcement. There is no modern governing body with real teeth. The Great Lakes aren't just a geographic resource, they're a legally protected geographic monopoly. The water is there, the law locks it in, and the people who want it can't have it. There's one more piece of this that most people miss, and it matters enormously for the economics. The Great Lakes are not landlocked. In 1959, the United States and Canada completed the St. Lawrence Seaway, a system of locks, canals, and channels that connects the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean. Ocean-going cargo ships can travel from the Atlantic all the way to Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, and Milwaukee. These are inland cities, hundreds of miles from any coastline, with direct access to global maritime shipping. Freshwater and ocean port access in the same place. No other inland region on Earth has this combination at anything close to this scale. Historically, a city had to choose: settle near fresh water or settle near the ocean. The Great Lakes cities got both. The same geographic logic that made the Midwest a manufacturing powerhouse in the 20th century, that's covered in the Factories video if you haven't seen it, runs directly through this. Now let's talk about the cities themselves, because this is where the story gets complicated. Detroit, Cleveland, Buffalo, Milwaukee. These cities saw real decline. Detroit lost more than half its peak population. Buffalo lost roughly 2/3. Entire neighborhoods went dark. The decline wasn't spin, it happened. But here's the thing, the decline was real, and the assets underneath it never left. Fresh water, ocean shipping access, industrial-scale infrastructure, freight networks, a workforce with deep manufacturing history. The geography didn't change. The industrial capacity didn't vanish. The question was never whether the land could support growth. The question was whether anyone would need what it offered. For a while, the answer was no. Cheap Sunbelt land, air conditioning, and relatively abundant Western water made the calculation easy. Move south, move west, build new. Now the math is shifting. The Sunbelt faces rising water stress, more intense heat, and a looming reckoning with the limits of what the Colorado and the Ogallala can provide. The Great Lakes advantages don't just hold steady in that world, they compound. Every year the Western water crisis deepens, every year the aquifer drops another inch, the Great Lakes get relatively more valuable. Not because they changed, because everything around them did. So we're back to that person in Cleveland, filling a glass from the tap. That indifference, that complete absence of thought about where the water comes from or whether it will be there tomorrow, is itself a product of geography. When you have always had something, you can't see it. The Great Lakes cities couldn't see what they were sitting on because abundance made the water invisible. The water was just there, the way air is just there. The rest of the country is starting to see it now. The question isn't whether the Great Lakes will matter in the second half of this century. It's whether the cities on their shores will be ready when they do. The world has a structure. Let's keep finding it.